Why StarCraft 2 players excel in AoE4? Let's see it.
If you take a look at Age of Empires 4 winnings, you'll suddenly discover that in top 10 there are 7 players that originate from StarCraft 2, 2 of them being at the very top of the list with a drastic difference in prize earnings compared to others.
Well, actually, Puppy is also from StarCraft 2, apparently. He just wasn't a pro player.
In prize earnings compared to others. How come Age of Empires 4 is mainly dominated by ex-StarCraft 2 pros, when there has been a consistent Age of Empires 2 scene for many years, with its elite talents? When Age of Empires 4 was released, it was the first time in history when StarCraft 2 players could test their skill in a different, established game that was also part of the RTS genre. If you are a StarCraft 2 fan, you're probably aware how much pride all StarCraft 2 players take in their game. It's the most complex, the
Oh, I know.
fastest and hardest esports game that has
And if you don't know, they will let you know.
ever been made in the whole world. Well, maybe except for Brood War, but that's also StarCraft, right? Whether you agree or disagree with it, this is a very common statement, and the community got the best chance to see and test the waters. As for Age of Empires, there has been a steady esports scene with amazing players from Age of Empires 2 for many decades as well.
I thought this bird was the mangonel shot. Look, there's a mangonel right here. And I thought the bird is the shot.
There has been a steady esports scene with amazing players from Age of Empires 2 for many decades as well. But compared to StarCraft, Age of Empires is, of course, a less demanding, slower paced game. However, there is a lot of depth in this game that
God. Ay. You know that meme with that kid sitting in a class and his veins popping? That's StarCraft 2 players wanting to tell you how hard StarCraft 2 is and how it's the hardest game in the world. I've never seen a StarCraft person discussing other RTS games without letting you know that StarCraft 2 is harder to play. I've never seen a discussion like that, never in my life.
a less demanding, slower paced game. However, there is a lot of depth in this game that makes it a wonderful experience. If you only scratch the surface, there were 8 nations on release, now 16, each with unique units, mechanics and bonuses. While they are not as different from each other as it is in StarCraft 2, you still have to learn each one to become a true professional player. Instead of only 2 resources, there are 4 types of that. And you can also exchange them, and there are many ways to gather each type of resources. So in short, the game is freaking complex if you think about it. Also, unlike in StarCraft 2, it doesn't involve as much microcontrol and speed, 2 advantages that StarCraft 2 players can usually boast of. It all seemed like the stars aligned, and it was an ultimate battleground to test all RTS players and see whose background was more fitting and useful in the new game. Seemingly, it should have been Age of Empires 2, because Age of Empires 4 is conceptually the same game, even though it has some new mechanics such as landmarks, which make it a bit more dynamic and allow for more interesting strats for different nations, but anyhow, it's still obviously far more similar to Age of Empires 2 than to StarCraft 2, up to the point that even the same strats such as Castle Rush exist in both games. It's been a long rambling, I know, so without further ado, let's see how it all looks on the first ever Premier tournament in Age of Empires 4. Starting from the roster, half of the players were highly acclaimed Age of Empires 2 legends.
Okay, so before we get further, like, here's my thoughts on which one is harder, okay? Comparing StarCraft and AoE games, first of all, is dumb, because they're different types of games. They're different type of RTS. StarCraft is hard mechanically. It's like if you don't pay attention for 2 seconds, you're dead, right? And some people like that. I don't. When StarCraft was more strategically oriented, I liked it more. Now StarCraft is mostly focused on mechanics and multitasking and everything else, right? The strategy part, I mean, the strategy is there, but it's already known, right? Everything's figured out, and you're relying less on the strategy than the mechanics. The AoE 4 is opposite, for example, right? AoE 4, you do need to play, like, AoE 4 gameplay looks slower, and and when you play it, it is not as fast as StarCraft. It's not. Like, anyone who tells you it's the same speed, it's not. StarCraft's faster. But there's a lot more strategy in AoE 4, and there's a lot more macroing in AoE 4. Like, macroing in StarCraft 2, for those that never played it, is you constantly make workers with Protoss and Terran until you have 16 workers on each base and minerals, right? There is no optimizing, there's no... You just make workers, you put them to work, and then the macro part in StarCraft is just constantly producing units. Now, because StarCraft 2 is a faster game, you need to produce units more often, and in AoE, you don't necessarily always constantly produce units. Like, sometimes you don't want to produce because you want to age up. In StarCraft, for basically the moment you start playing, you will constantly be producing units. That's how macro works, right? And you don't stop. That's the macro. But there's no... Which resources do I gotta prioritize? Which resources, you know, how do I split my workers? The only, I would say, more complicated macro is Zerg, because you have to choose between making units and making workers. But even then, the economy part is non-existent, right? Once you make workers, like, that's it. They're mining and that's it. While in AoE 4, you constantly have to readjust your resources, depending what you're playing, depending what you're playing against. You have to adjust strategy if your opponent is rushing castle. You know, it's different. Like, AoE is slower. StarCraft 2 is faster. Both AoE 2 and 4. But I think the resource management and the economy and macro is way more complicated in AoE 4 than it is in StarCraft 2. But micro is harder in StarCraft 2 because the units do so much damage and because of all the splash in the game. Like, if you don't react immediately, you lose the game, like, straight up. Imagine one mangonel shot hits your units and the game's over, right? That's how it is in StarCraft with, like, 15 different units.
Age of Empires 2 legends, most notably the Viper, the long-standing, unbeatable champion of Age of Empires 2 with more than 300,000 winnings in his entire career. Other names were also well known in Age of Empires community. Hera, Kasva and Rekon were all long-time veterans of the scene. Ex-StarCraft 2 representatives were much less prominent in that comparison. These were not the best StarCraft 2 had. However, you should never sleep on those players. Marine Lord was an incredibly strong Terran player in 2015 and 2016, and Drum Brothers, Lucifron and Vortex were successful in every game they tried. In early StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty days, they were amongst the best foreigners, and they were also a strong team in Blizzard.
They were actually really good at one point. Here is the young Vortex and Lucifron. Wait, Vortex had hair here. That's crazy. Actually, their peak, they were really good in StarCraft. Like, StarCraft community, I think, forgets early on in StarCraft, but if you remember early on in StarCraft, Vortex and Lucifron at one point were actually top players. Like, they were top foreigners. I think Vortex at one point was best or second best Zerg outside Korea, and I think Lucifron was also the best or second best Terran outside Korea. Like, I don't like whenever people talk about them, they were like, oh yeah, they were, like, had some high-level finishes. It's like, no, they were very good for a very long time in StarCraft. It's just that StarCraft's been out for 14 years, so, like, oh, they were good for a bit is like 2 years, which is nothing compared to the whole game. You know what I mean?
MOBA called Heroes of the Storm, and now it was their time to shine in Age of Empires 4. Last but not the least, the Mista also used to compete in StarCraft 2 in 2010 and 2011 as a part of Team Empire. So, how did the tournament unfold? Starting from the first matches...
Wait, he skipped... Oh, that's the third...
Lucifron
Okay, never mind.
faced the greatest Age of Empires player, the Viper. It was
By the way, I was... an interesting fact. I was on team with Mista in StarCraft 2. Mista was pro in StarCraft for... I don't know how long it was, 6, 12 months, something like that. And one time we went to a DreamHack, I think it was in Romania, and we shared a hotel room because we were both same team. So, you know, our team got us the same room.
Been serious, but
Little
it was
known
easy
fact.
to guess who's gonna come on top. The Norwegian legend just had too much experience for Lucifron to handle. On the opposite side of the bracket, Kasva was up against
Norwegian
Vortex,
legend.
the brother
He is a
of
legend.
the fallen Lucifron. This series was marked by very entertaining games, and the StarCraft 2 player managed to advance with a 3-1 score. In the match between the Mista and Marine Lord, the former was able to pull it off with a very tight score of 3-2. This
Don't kill me, but I actually didn't watch this tournament at all. I think I was playing AA4, I just played the game all day and I didn't actually watch the tournament.
was despite the fact that Marine Lord
Single bed? Yeah.
was top 1 spot on ladder, but the Greek player also had some past records in Age of Empires 2 alongside StarCraft 2, which definitely helped him in this battle. He would eventually overcome Vortex and face the Viper in the finals. making it an exclusively Age of Empires Veterans Finals, which he lost with 2-4 score. This was a slightly predictable result.
Like, I remember watching this game specifically. I remember like, I didn't follow the whole tournament, but I remember watching a game here and there. And I remember this game actually still. Like, it's been 3 fucking years. Mista went, this is Hill and Dale. Mista went for like 4 or 5 TCs or something.
The history of Age of Empires becomes the first Age of Empires 4 champion. This is no surprise, but it was also rather early to talk about, because StarCraft 2 players also showed some great resilience and
sorry for pausing the video. Look at the wait, is this?
Also rather early to talk about.
Okay, it's 3rd TC. I thought this was his 2nd TC. I was like, holy. It's
players also showed some great resilience and demonstrated amazing games, but it should be noted that at that stage, Age of Empires 4 was in a raw state of balance. The French faction was dominating on the ladder, and there would be many more patches and changes implemented very soon. A month later, another premier tournament was at the doors, and this time you would see a lot of familiar StarCraft 2 names. We won't dive deep into every single standoff between StarCraft 2 and Age of Empires players, let's just cut it to the semi-finals where the most interesting matches happened. Exactly there, the Viper faced Vortex, who was seeking revenge for his brother once again. Just in the previous round, the Viper once again outplayed Luciferon, this time with 2-0 score. So in this first game, Vortex speaks English and goes for an aggressive playstyle featuring English archers and the Ram. A typical strategy to dominate the map and possibly either lock the player on a limited area or straight up destroy his base.
English archers and the Ram. By the way, I'm obviously not expecting the guy to know everything about AoE4. It's just funny when you hear other people talking about AoE4.
At first it seemed like his push was going to work, but the Viper managed to stand his ground. The next map featured a big lake, and at that time in Age of Empires 4 balance, it was necessary to seize control of water areas to win. Unfortunately for the Viper, he was facing Rus, which meant he had a disadvantage on the water from the very beginning.
Wait, were aeroships shooting while moving? I don't remember that.
It was necessary to seize control of water areas to win. Unfortunately for the Viper, he was facing Rus, which meant he had a disadvantage on the water from the very beginning, since Rus is able to convert fish boats into Lodias and attack immediately upon entering the next age. Third map was a decider, and Vortex picked the Chinese faction that is famous for its late game strength.
Vortex China!
Eventually survived till that stage, and then proceeded to reconquer the sacred site from the Viper, who constructed a formidable defense up the hills.
Lining up on the hill, coming down with the shots, they're trying to focus on the nest of bees, that's what you have to go for. But it looks like Vortex doesn't really care, he just wants to push up. Network of Citadels coming in here for Viper for the extra firepower. But I think that's just gonna be a little too late over here. No boiling oil. Means that the Palace Guards can close the distance and start taking down those Springolds. Springolds trade off against each other.
Wait, Vortex was a China goat!
And you see Viper is pulling everybody to stop this one. The problem that he's facing is that without boiling oil, those Palace Guards can just run beneath the castle and fight this one. Nest of Bees now opening up on this one. Viper has an insane rate of fire with those longbows.
Oh my god, but Vortex moves in!
As long as the Nest of Bees are there, as long as the Palace Guards are there, this is gonna be...
Wait, Steel Series Prime Cup. I think I played in this one, but I think I lost in like round of 32. This was my first tournament I think I played.
Extremely difficult to hold. Many of those longbows are now heavily damaged, and the moment this White Tower goes down, Viper will lose that bonus, and he's gonna have no chance against the Palace Guards. And the Nest of Bees flooding out. Looks like the White Tower is about to go down over here. Viper will be forced back from the central region. Now he's the one fighting against the hill. Nest of Bees once again unleashing on are just enough on the battle.
In contrast to...
Wait, so who won?
Decimate those longbows and
okay, Vortex won.
Now,
wait, this is demo versus... Oh, I remember this. Okay, I remember this tournament, actually.
To the previous tournament, Steel Series
Demo
Prime
Vortex
had exclusive
was
StarCraft
the
finals with Vortex and the Muslim. The latter also knocked out another veteran of Age of Empires scene in his semi-finals match. This marked a new era for Age of Empires 4 esports landscape. The next 7 out of 8 premier tournaments were won and mostly dominated by ex-StarCraft 2 players. With the addition of such names as Linux and Beastyqt, the already tight and crowded Age of Empires 4 esports scene got even more competitive.
This is N4C.
But why did it happen? Does it have to do with StarCraft 2 players just being superior and more mechanically gifted, or are there other reasons? So let's first tackle the mechanical part of RTS games. It's true that StarCraft 2 is the most demanding mechanical RTS out there, and players in this game just have to be good at being fast. A multitasking
I agree
is
with
a
that.
cornerstone of a successful late game.
I
and
agree
this is
with
the
that
skill
too.
that transitions very well into Age of Empires. While this game might be somewhat slower and microcontrol is a bit simpler, there is always something to do on the map. The game just has a lot of base management,
I agree with that
production,
too.
map exploring, and so on. So naturally, the player with the best multitasking has an advantage. Yes, the game is slower, but it doesn't mean you don't have to perform 200 actions to get ahead. Another possible reason is the difference in the size of the esports community. StarCraft 2 has been supported by...
Okay, let me go back so we don't have to stare at someone's face. So, I do agree with that. In AoE 4, you don't need as much APM as you do in StarCraft. But, see, the good point he made right there, there's always something to do in AoE 4. There's always a wall you can build, a house you can put, a worker to relocate, to harass, to move a knight, to move a scout. Like, there's always something. In a lot of RTS games, because the maps are not randomly generated, you usually have a plan, and it's you go A, B, A, B, A, B, B, A, right? In AoE 4, or, I mean, I'm not going to talk about AoE 2 because I don't play it, right? So I'm sticking to AoE 4. There's always something you can do, not necessarily better, but there's always somewhere you can put in the time. And I think that initially, and I've talked about this a long time ago, regarding like StarCraft 2 versus AoE 2 players when we came over here. AoE 2 players had way better understanding of macro. And the first tournament was obviously Viper 1, and Mista from Age of Mythology mainly, right, was second. Because StarCraft players didn't understand really resources having 4. Like, I know this might sound dumb, but we didn't know what stone was for, right? We didn't understand for what you need stone. When is it valuable to get stone? You know, wheelbarrow type of upgrades don't exist in StarCraft. So we don't know if we're supposed to get wheelbarrow early or later. But you had a lot of those interactions in AoE 2 already, so it's a lot easier to understand and transition to the game, right? And by the way, there's this notion that AoE 2 players never tried AoE 4 for real, which is not, it is not true. I know, like, Doubt had close to 1,000 games in AoE 4, I think. I remember Mr. Yo had, like, 400 or 600, somewhere between their games, which is not like I tried the game, I didn't like it. Like, that's a lot of time put in. Obviously, Viper had insane amounts of games. When he played for the first, I don't know how long he played AoE for a year and a half, he played like as much as anyone else did. Like, he didn't play less. When Hera played, obviously he played a shit ton. But at the time, there was a lot of AoE 2 players playing. There was Kaposh was playing, Kazo was playing, Mr. Yo was playing, I don't know if I mentioned Doubt, Viper, Hera. All those guys played a lot of games. And what ended up happening, I think it's like 6 months in, there was a clear difference in how people played. AoE 2 players were playing with a lot more like boomy and a lot more straightforward. They would try to get up multiple TCs and then have a straight up fight kind of thing, or use small groups of units early on to attack. Whereas StarCraft players were either playing really aggressive immediately, which is how you played in StarCraft 2, with like knights and stuff like that, or they would be like going 2 or 3 TC, but then they wouldn't make units until the last possible moment and then like surround the enemy. And the styles were, I remember when I was playing at the time, when someone was playing on a Smurf, I knew, like, I could feel if it was an AoE 2 or AoE 4 or StarCraft 2 player, just because of the way they played it. And then certain styles kind of developed from there. Obviously, when animation canceling was broken, everyone was doing that. But yeah.
Actions to get ahead. Another possible reason is the difference in the size of the esports community. StarCraft 2 has been supported by Blizzard for a long time. It had a very high number of premier tournaments as well as major cups, leagues and even weeklies, while Age of Empires series had some of that as well, but it was never the same size and scale as it was with StarCraft 2. With all the infrastructure and conditions, StarCraft 2 players just had a better gateway into esports, and they could actually afford an esports career. It was a viable choice with lots of opportunities and places to compete, so starting a full-time gaming career was much easier. In addition to that, StarCraft 2 players are famous for their work ethics and hardcore practice routines. This also has to do with the overall development of the esports scene, as such practice pays off and the stakes are much higher. Besides, if you just take a look at the Korean scene, you'll discover how much they were sacrificing to become the champions. Their team houses, strict schedules, and insane amount of hours is what contributed to an overall rise of competitiveness and difficulty of StarCraft 2 scene. Last but not the least, the very existence of Age of Empires.
That is also true, by the way. I will say that. Like, all the guys that are now playing AoE 4, like Marine Lord, me, Vortex, Lucifron, we all used to play StarCraft for 8 hours a day. Right, and that was normal. That wasn't like I'm preparing for a tournament. Everyone was just playing a lot of StarCraft every single day without any breaks. Like, putting in that much effort was already in from the start, kind of thing.
2 is an important factor that slowed down the Age of Empires 4 scene. The same thing happened with StarCraft 2 and StarCraft 2 Brood War. Even though StarCraft 2 was arguably in a better financial state and there were more opportunities at those times, but many players were not keen on changing games and starting from scratch when they could still compete and win prize money and status in the good old StarCraft 1. We see the same story with Age of Empires 2. The game is still blooming, with new content and DLCs dropping every year. There is just no reason to abandon the game for the new world of Age of Empires 4. Even the player base of Age of Empires 2 is still higher than in Age of Empires 4, which is an amazing result for such an old game. There are many grassroots tournaments as well, and if you look at the participant names, you'll see the famous Viper, Hera, Winchester, and many others. Players who could put up a fight against StarCraft 2 invasion of Age of Empires 4, but they prefer to master their skills in Age of Empires 2, which makes sense because of the things we just discussed. We reach out to B and Winchester, prominent Age of Empires players, to ask for their opinion about this topic. Their answers are translated from Russian into English.
Ребята с Microsoft спонсируют, денег нормально, ну а нам просто неинтересно играть. Ну, у меня такое было, Хер, он же трайхардил четверку, потом он говорит, просто неинтересно. Он выиграл турнир и понимает, что он больше не хочет играть в нее. Вот, игра просто на выходе очень плохая. Сейчас она, может быть, стала лучше, но в нее играть совсем неохота, она просто медленная.
So, in reality...
You know why I'm laughing? Now it might be better, but there's no start to play. It's just too slow and dull. Do you know what happened when we were at Red Bull? The AoE 2 players, and I think it was Leary, who I talked to, and Leary's like watching us play AoE 4. And again, I'm not saying AoE 2 is easier or like not fast game, but Leary was looking at us and he was like, "You guys play so fucking fast. That's insane to me." And that's why I'm cackling, because it's just, he mentioned that it's slow game, and I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't know if AoE 4 is slower compared to AoE 2. I would say AoE 4 is slower to observe than AoE 2. It's slower when you're watching it. Yes, in my opinion, I think AoE 4 is slower when you're watching it. Playing it, I don't know about that.
Может быть, стало лучше, но в нее играть совсем неохота, она просто медленная.
So, in reality, we never really know what it will be like if Age of Empires 2 would be suddenly closed down. The majority of hardcore Age of Empires 2 players are still putting more hours into it rather than in Age of Empires 4, which allows ex-StarCraft 2 pros to run rampant in the new game. Will it change with time? Perhaps. It would be a very cool showdown to see in the future. What do you think about this topic? Share your opinion. Thing happened.
Okay, so I think there was actually a good video, except the remark here and there. Like, I think the video was well made and researched and overall objective. I agree on his reasonings. And when he said why are AoE 2 players still playing AoE 2, I actually never made the connection. But Brood War and StarCraft 2 is actually the same thing. When StarCraft 2 came over, because I was playing it then, right, just like I was at the start of AoE 4, a lot of people were like, why don't Brood War players switch? And the thing is, if there's still money in Brood War or AoE 2, why would they switch to a new game where they might not win? And I've said this so many times. Why take the risk? If AoE 2 still has money and it still has content coming out, and they like the game, why would you switch to AoE 4? There's simply no reason, right? I've said this long ass time ago. That's why a lot of them went back to AoE 2. It's more familiar. When I say there's less competition, I mean they have the competition now. Let's say it's 30 players. And let's say we have 30 players in AOE4. So instead of staying in the competition of top 30 players, if they move to AOE4, suddenly the competition is double in terms of ranking, skill, whatever. So it generally doesn't make sense for them to switch, right? It's like if AOE 5 came out and it has the same viewership or less viewership than AOE 4, and I won every tournament in AOE 4, why would I switch to AOE 5, right? To me, it just makes sense. So, yeah, or they just might not like the game, right? Like, I know that some AOE 2 players still play AOE 4 from time to time. Some of them play, like, team games. Some of them play one-on-ones. You know, it depends. But there's not just playing the game. There's, like, a lot of them have YouTube channels that did not do well at all when they were uploading AOE 4 videos. And they got flamed quite a bit on their content. So, for content creators, they can switch in no time. You would think so, but I do, like, again, I was there when content creators and players switched to AOE 4. They got flamed a lot by their communities. And by the way, the same thing happens when Brood War players switched over to StarCraft 2. It was the same thing. People told them to stop streaming that shit game, go back to Brood War, and yada yada. But I think, listen, StarCraft 2 is a great game. I've said this before, it's a great game. It's just not a game for me anymore. I think AoE 2 is a great game. That's why so many people play it. And I think AoE 4 is a great game. It was not a great game when it released. There was too many problems and bugs. I think it's a great game now. And will we ever see AoE 2 versus AoE 4? Or StarCraft versus AoE 2? Probably not. I can't imagine it. Unless all the funding gets cut from AoE 2, I don't think it's going to happen. And I think AoE 2 has strong enough community to sustain on their own. Another interesting thing is someone brought this up a couple of weeks ago or months ago that kind of stuck with me. Every time for FIFA or shooter game or whatever, every time a new game comes out, everyone switches to the new one. But in RTS, that's not what's common, right? If FIFA 2022 is right now and 2023 comes out, or 24, doesn't matter, 25, everyone's switching to that one. But in RTS games, the switch doesn't happen. You can play both games. And that's great, but at the same time, it splits the community. It's an interesting question that I thought about quite a bit. What would have happened if AoE 2 was shut down and then when 3 and AoE 4 got released only, right? Obviously, they're completely different games. But would RTS games be bigger then? If, you know, from Brood War we went to StarCraft 2. Or maybe they're just way too different, but yeah, fighting games are also a good one. Fighting games, the previous one dies out when the new one is released, right? But it's not the same in RTS, because I think RTS games, they're a lot different from one another. Like, AoE 2 to AoE 3 to AoE 4 is a lot different than, you know, Tekken 1 to 75. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe in the future, RTS games will be a lot more. AoE 6 and AoE 7 won't be like completely different games, but just like an upgrade and a massive patch rework that just called AoE, you know, whatever, and then everyone switches to it. It's kind of interesting to think about. Like I said, who knows where RTS games could have, would have, should have been if that was the case, right? I don't know. Anyway, if you're watching this on YouTube, I want to thank you so much for watching. Check me out on Twitch. I'm probably live right now, destroying nerds and losing to nerds left and right in AoE 4. Twitch gamers, let's keep going.